Very much for having us. We looked forward to this earlier to do it, and with a little bit of a delay, we put a little bit more into the presentation, so we hope you enjoy it. A little disclaimer, first of all, since we are recording this, everything that we say today does not mean your claim is covered. Just for the record, we are just going to give you some guidance in regards to the insurance. We are very interactive people, so if you have questions, we are more than happy to answer them throughout the presentation, but we will also be happy to take them at the end. So a little bit about myself. I'm Brian Schaafsma. I'm the Vice President of Commercial Line Sales and Marketing at Allen Insurance, and joining me tonight is Nathan Allen, who is Vice President at Allen Insurance and also one of the owners of Allen Insurance. So with that, I'm going to do my share screen. Hopefully it works so everybody can see it, and start our presentation. So just a little bit of what our plan tonight is for the presentation is we are, of course, doing a little bit of greet and overview, but then we're going to talk about farm insurance, property, farm liability, and of course other items that you may not be thinking about, but we do as insurance people. And then of course answer any questions that you might have in regards to what we presented, or just in general to insurance across the board, because we know that it can be a very fun topic, and we have a lot of knowledge for it, but understand that it's not an easy thing to follow along with sometimes.
Well, good evening, everybody. I'd just like to give a little background on who we are. So Allen Insurance Group is a family-run business, and we were established in the town of Warkworth in 1903 in the basement of the town hall. Of course, we're licensed to provide insurance in the province of Ontario, but we have, starting off, as I was saying, we started off in the basement of the town hall in Warkworth, which is population 600. We now have 7 locations with over 60 team members to support our clients in local communities. We are a dynamic community and a dynamic company, and we're dedicated to providing superior strategies, service, and solutions to protect your future. People are our business, and our promise to you is and always has been that we will take care of you.
One of the things that can be confusing with insurance is you'll hear about brokers and agents in the insurance industry. The main difference between brokers and agents is that a broker represents multiple insurance companies, while an agent typically just represents one. A great example of this, of course, is that Allen Insurance Group is a broker. We deal with multiple farm mutual insurance and other insurance companies, such as your local mutuals like Bay of Quinte Mutual, HTM Mutual, Commonwealth Mutual, but we also deal with big insurance carriers that can handle farm as well, such as Wawanesa, Western General or Economical, and of course the Intact and Northbridge. An agent typically can be found to just carry one. One used to be known and very popular called State Farm, who has now changed their name to Desjardins. That is an agent that only deals with one insurance company. The advantage to dealing with a broker is, of course, that we can go to multiple insurance carriers to provide products or service that you might need. Some insurance companies don't provide all the other coverage that another company might provide, and that's why we feel being a broker is an advantage. We can provide different options to our customers.
So I don't know if this is a loaded question to ask everybody or not, but when you hear the word insurance, what comes to mind? There's probably a few people mumbling under their breath right now, but the insurance is intended to take the losses of a few people and spread it among the many. That's the whole basis of insurance. And indemnity is the term that refers to an insurance policy that compensates an insured party for certain unexpected damages or losses up to a certain limit, which is usually the amount of the loss itself. Insurance companies provide coverage in exchange for premiums paid by the insured parties.
Now, typically when you take a look at your own insurance policy, you're probably going to see certain aspects on your farm insurance policy. There's a couple of main items that we would like you to look at insuring, but then there's other things that come along over the years that we also have to take into consideration. Most farms, of course, have their dwelling or their home, which is your main residence, and it would include coverage on that building, the personal contents within that building. One of the things that we really recommend that customers take a look at underneath their home insurance policy or the home portion of their farm policy is that they have a clause called guaranteed replacement cost. We all noticed a huge increase in building materials, specifically at one part in 2021. Thankfully, we've seen it come down a little bit now, but they had gone up extremely high in 2021. And a lot of house insurance policies, therefore, didn't carry a proper limit to rebuild it if a total loss did happen. The guaranteed replacement cost clause is a clause that is put on to the dwelling portion of the farm policy to make sure that even if the limit on the house is not adequate, your home would still be rebuilt. Some insurance carriers cannot provide it depending on the age of your home or the condition of your home, but if it's available, we would highly recommend that you purchase that guaranteed replacement cost endorsement on your home. The home would also include a coverage called additional living expenses, which if there was a loss at the home and you weren't allowed to live in it while the repairs are being done, they would provide accommodations for you to stay in, whether it is renting a location or maybe even bringing a trailer to the site for you to live in. With regards to farm buildings, many farm buildings are insured on one of two ways. You either have replacement costs, which would intend that the insurance company is going to rebuild that barn in the event that there's a total loss, or even if it's a partial loss, they will pay the expenses to do all the repairs. Replacement cost on farm buildings does not have the opportunity to have a guaranteed replacement clause on it. So it's important that you review that each year to make sure that the replacement cost on that farm building is still adequate. Then there is the opportunity to carry actual cash value. If your barn is older, you may only be able to have the actual cash value coverage on the barn, and that's because insurance companies have certain rules and regulations that they're going to follow. Actual cash value is determined by taking the replacement cost and applying depreciation based on the age of it, the condition of it. It could include the housekeeping around it. It could include the location by territory, things like that. But actual cash value has a typical depreciation value of anywhere between 20 to 50%. And then you'll also see that if a building is on replacement cost coverage, it's going to be underneath what's called broad form coverage. Broad form coverage is typically what we consider an all risk policy. Everything is covered except for what they specifically exclude. Typical exclusions underneath that coverage would be that war and terrorism are not covered, or possibly that cyber or data breach is not going to be covered, and mold derivatives are not going to be covered underneath that. And then there's also the form called named perils, and the named perils form is just like it states. If the peril is named, it's insured. So typically the perils that would be named on the policy would be fire, wind, hail, lightning, impact by land vehicle, impact by air vehicle. One thing that we see a lot with farm outbuildings is that you want to make sure that the coverage of snow load is covered. Sometimes you will see a policy written with it on named perils, or maybe it's on fire and extended coverages, and they don't include the snow load coverage. Snow accumulating on top of a farm building could cause it to collapse, so it would be important to make sure you have that coverage on there. When it comes to machinery and equipment, of course, these items are usually things that could leave the premises, but sometimes there are also things that are included within your farm buildings and permanently attached. These can be covered on replacement cost. When it comes to the farm equipment that leaves the premises, typically they will only provide replacement costs on those items up to 5 years. Good example would be a tractor that you're going to use for the farm. You buy it brand new or a couple years old. They will insure it for the replacement cost up until it's 5 years old. And then after the 5-year period, you would then be only able to get actual cash value on the farm equipment. Blanket implements, I think we all can agree that there's items laying around the farm that are still useful, but you also don't necessarily need to insure them on an individual basis because they're getting older and they only are used at certain points of the year. You can put a blanket policy on there to cover all of the blanket implements for a large sum. So you might say, I want to have $40,000 in blanket implements, and it just covers them on a blanket basis without you having to list each and every one of them. But that way, if a loss did happen, you would have coverage for that. Produce, this is your hay, your grain, your feed, silage, haylage, anything like that that you would have on the farm that you are either, you're using it for your own farm, or if you were a cash cropper, you might want to insure that crop that you've just taken off the field before it is sold. There's also the loss of income coverage that is available to farmers, that in the event that you did have an insured loss and it prevented you from operating your farm, this would replace your normal monthly revenue until you're able to get that farm up and running again after the loss occurred. Sometimes that can be very important because, of course, you might have a lien on a tractor that you're making monthly payments on, or we have mortgages that we have to all pay. Having the loss of income coverage on your farm policy would just make sure that you still have those revenues coming in, even when your farm is not operational from an insured peril loss. And then finally, we've got the renewable energy systems. We are seeing more and more farmers, of course, having solar panel systems or wind turbines on their properties. Some are owned, some are not. Some of them are just that they're renting the space of the land to other parties to use it. But most insurance companies will provide renewable energy coverage that would include both the systems themselves, the revenue that is generated from them, and of course, provide the liability protection for those energy systems should a loss occur that caused bodily injury or property damage to a third party.
And we slide over into the liability side of things, folks. Your farm liability, it's got to be one of the most important coverages on the whole policy for you. The farm liability includes your personal and your premises liability. So anything that, as Brian mentioned, a third party comes onto your property and they slip and fall. It could be somebody like the FedEx guy. Lord knows that Amazon drivers have been knocking on everybody's door the last 2 years. And but a slip and fall, an injury like that, something that you're held negligent for, the ice should have been cleared up or salted, sanded, something like that. A claim comes from it, your liability, that's where it kicks in. As well, the liability is designed to look after the premises that you're on as well. So we all have large farm acreage and things like that. You owe a duty of care to anybody coming onto your property. Be it a trespasser or not. Now, a trespasser you owe the lowest form of care to. However, there is still something there that you owe them to. And the liability again picks your liability limit picks them up for claims brought against you in lawsuits, items like that. There's also included in a lot of farm liability policies is some limited farm pollution liability as well. Now, this isn't something that this is third party coverage or first party coverage. I'm sorry. For the farm, and it does look at. We've all again have sprays, Roundup, pesticides, things like that on our farm. If there was ever anything like that, in a lawsuit, negligence lawsuit comes from it, you are going to be looked after. Now, this is not paying for the cleanup costs of everything as well. This is one of the big things that I can have this is in spraying is the spray drift. It kills the neighbor's trees, and they turn around and they want to be compensated for it. Your limited farm pollution liability kicks in. If we have a diesel tank that splits and gets into a waterway, that's a different story. It would have to be on a full environmental liability policy on that for the cleanup costs of those nature. Sometimes our own farm just isn't enough for us to stretch our legs, so we've got additional farm locations. We may have a farm rented in the next, it could be next door, it could be in the next township over. The additional farm location is added to the liability policy, and it is then the blanket of your liability insurance covers over that extra property as well. It does need to be named on your insurance policy for those locations as well. Additional insurance, the landlord who owns that farm that you're renting or someone of that nature may request that they be named on your liability policy if a claim should occur, that they're brought into that claim. They're going to be protected underneath your policy as well. Farmers tenants legal liability on those properties that you rent. There may be a barn on there that the tenant is allowed you to use. You could be responsible for, if you were deemed negligent, somebody is easily smoking in a barn. I know that's an age-old thing, and whereas farm kids were told never to have matches or anything, but it happens. We're in the insurance business and we've seen it. If you're deemed negligent for causing loss to that tenanted property, the farmer's tenant's legal liability can kick in then as well and look after any claims that way. Additional business pursuits, livestock some days just doesn't cut it. So we've got other things such as farm market gardens, selling of our own meat and things off the farm. These are things that should be listed on the policy as well. If anything ever came back, if you sold meat to a customer, and even though it's government inspected, something was missed somewhere, you could be pulled into a lawsuit because of that, and or a claim because of that. So we want to make sure that those items, those pursuits are listed on your policy, so your liability covers that. Custom farming operations, like we don't have enough time in the day to do our own things, we can always go and do our neighbors as well for a fee. This kind of opens up your liability as well, because you're now doing a few more operations than just your normal farm. You're being paid to farm somebody else's farm on there for their gain. Equipment can be used a lot more. It's being used a lot more. So the law of large numbers kind of kicks in there and says that the more that something is happening, the greater chance of having a loss occurs. So it's important to have any custom farming operations named on the policy as well. You may board others' livestock. You may have your great aunt might be interested in sheep and she buys a few of her own and you have them at your property, or you're charging a fee for somebody to board the livestock. Happens all the time in the horse community. You have care, custody, and control of those animals. So that needs to be listed on your liability, on your insurance policy under your liability as well if you're boarding non-owned livestock. And then, of course, in the sheep business, there are the guardian dogs that are out watching over the flocks, and these dogs are working dogs. They can be listed on your policy as well. They can be covered for physical damage as they would be normally for livestock. These again are not your family pets, so these are guardian dogs. If you do have guardian dogs, it is very wise to have signage up saying that there's dogs working on this property, that type of thing as well. Other than that, right?
A few other items that you might have to consider is key person insurance. Now, key person insurance requires a different license than neither Nathan or I carry. But it's something that you should keep in mind. Our office does have team members that can do it, but it's around life insurance. You might have a very valuable person for your organization, and if that person were to have a death, you need to replace that person. Life insurance would assist with that, of course. But then there's also the accidental death, dismemberment, and replacement labor. This person too could have that kind of coverage to help out on the farm in the event that they got injured. You do have maybe a slow time of year where it's not a big deal if that happened, but if it happens at the peak season of your year and you're searching for employees or helpers, then you would want to make sure you provided some assistance with that. I'm not sure about the sheep farming industry, but I know many industries are struggling to find people to work, just to actually work. So if that's an issue in the sheep farming industry as well, that's something that could help out. Also, your farm auto insurance. A lot of people mistakenly rate their vehicles incorrectly. And it could lead to a situation where your liability insurance or maybe the physical damage insurance on your vehicles is not going to respond correctly just because the vehicle was not rated correctly for its usage. If it truly is a farm vehicle, rate it accordingly. If it's not a farm vehicle, rate it accordingly. Make sure that you're rating your vehicles correctly. And then of course, there's the cargo insurance or the transit coverage that you might need for, transporting the animals. It could be, whether to be a sale barn, whether it be to the butcher, wherever it's going, or it could also be that you need to transport some of your produce, maybe transport some of your equipment. You might need to have that coverage on your policy to protect you for that.
Just some other items on this list as well. Any dairy operations, milk contamination. Something gets into the milk tank, it gets shipped out, and then you're charged for that entire load. This can be very costly, and in majority of dairy operation policies, milk contamination is something that's included in there. We always want to make sure, so we always like to list it on the policy as well. Another big thing is risk management. We've all got outbuildings, and they always need maintenance. It's the one thing about being on a farm that there's never a dull moment. There's always something to do. Just when you think that, well, I'm caught up with this, you look over your shoulder and there's something else I can do. One of the biggest things is your risk management. We've all, we're on farms, so there's grain and items around that attract vermin. The chewing of wires, all of those things. Those things need to be looked at and inspected. Keeping steel on the buildings and constantly screw nailed down and things like that. It just, if you schedule your maintenance on your buildings, that's great. If you don't, the buildings are going to schedule the maintenance themselves. Okay, that's just one thing. And the same thing with equipment. We've had a lot of losses over the years with combines, for instance, not being blown out, not being cleaned out properly, different things like that. And I mean, this being from a farm myself, I know the cost of farm equipment. It is not cheap. And used equipment these days seems to be even more. And maintaining it, giving it a lifelong, or giving it a long life and everything just helps you out as well. Now, the one big thing that has come up over the past while are farm activists as well. From my perspective, a lot of it is they just don't understand what happens on a farm. They've heard stories or they've seen a bad documentary somewhere, and all of a sudden they're on the bandwagon and they know it all. These people have been parked out in front of farms, protesting at farms, coming onto farms as well. Now, these are trespassers on farms. The best way to deal with them is call the authorities and have them removed from your property. Is one of the biggest things, and not to engage them. Just do not engage them as much as we can. We have to ignore them and go on about our business. But it is a call to the authorities and have them removed from the property is my biggest tip from them. But the other bigger one is just do not engage them. That is very important on that end of things as well. There's not a lot we can say about farm activists. We haven't had a lot of problem with them our way or with clients of ours right now, but I do see it as a thing that we're going to really have to address in the future on things as well. And it's very unfortunate.
So as Jen provided to everyone, we have this checklist, and this is just a generalized checklist that we provided. It's just things that you should maybe take a look at your own policy and review and say, do I have this? And of course, if you don't own anything like this, or if you don't need the coverage for something like this, of course, you don't need to check it off. But if you need to have the coverage for it and you don't have it, that's when it's going to be an important thing to look into it. With most of the items on the checklist, they are quotable, of course, without having to purchase a policy. So whoever you're insured with right now, if you've gone through this list and you say, wait a minute, we don't have our produce insured, I wonder what it would cost to add it to the policy. A quick phone call or a quick email to your insurance provider to say, hey, I want to know what it would cost to insure my produce. I have X number of dollars during my peak season. What would it cost to insure that? Or maybe, like many of us, we've been busy, and we forgot to actually notify our insurance provider of that new equipment or a change in operations that we're doing. And a quick phone call to get that done, but also to get a quote is very, very simple. Most things can be done immediately over the phone or a couple of day turnaround to get the quote. When you're quoting a full farm, doing the whole thing, of course, that takes a little bit more time because you're a brand new customer. We have to get all the underwriting detail of the properties, the buildings, the equipment, and stuff like that. But many of these items that we've talked about tonight on your existing farm policy are quotable very quickly to make sure that you have them. One thing that Nathan touched on, and Jen had mentioned to me that it's a topic that a lot of farmers are struggling with, and that is in regards to the pollution liability coverage. If you do have a fuel storage tank on your property, which a lot of farmers do for their equipment, for their vehicles, you should look to have what's called a fuel tank liability policy that includes cleanup expenses. If the fuel tank were to leak onto your premises and the TSSA is involved, as they usually are required to be involved, there is an amount of remediation that has to be done to meet their requirements, and pollution liability policy with cleanup expenses would go a long way to help with that remediation. Pollutants can be anything, like Nathan mentioned, fertilizer. It could be the fuel that you use for your equipment. But it could also be that, you have some acid to dry hay while you're baling and stuff. If that's the case, that you need to make sure that you have the proper coverage, that if a spill did occur, it would be cleaned up. We hope that you find the checklist useful. Insurance is changing regularly. Some of it is still stable as it's always been, but years ago we never thought we would be insuring solar panels on systems, and now we do. Years ago we never thought we would have to have a conversation with a dairy farmer to say, do you have cyber protection to prevent your robots from being attacked by a virus electronically? But those are the conversations we now have to have with farmers to make sure that they're adequately protected. And that concludes our presentation. We would love it if anybody had any questions that they would like to throw at us. We love answering questions and doing our best to point you in the right direction.
Hi, Sam here. I have a question. We've got 3 properties, not the one here. The other 2, one of the other 2 gets hunters all the time. That's one. And on this property, we have a problem with skidooers. We have a bit of a hill, and on the other side, they're just racing back and forth, and it will probably be okay, except that there's a small gravel pit that is no longer operating there. And I can see they're whizzing around it all the time. So those are our 2 big problems. If you could touch on those, that'd be
yeah. The one thing is your liability is there to protect you. Okay, so if somebody were to be on your property even without your permission, and they got hurt and they decided to sue you over it, your liability should respond on your behalf. Okay. Historically, we've seen people take their own actions, which is maybe try to prevent them from accessing the property and things like that. I actually involved with hundreds of acres with our family that we can't seem to stop people from going on to for hunting purposes. Thankfully, hunting is not all year round for certain species, but basically what you can do is just post signage, of course, to say no hunting, no trespassing. It sometimes will not prevent it. I know one of the issues we have is they enter from the back of the property, not knowing where the property line is. And the only thing we can suggest there too is put a clear marker. If you can find the access point that they're coming to that clearly states that there's no trespassing. And of course, notify your local authorities that people are on there hunting. But I think the Ministry of Natural Resources has a hard time keeping track and preventing that as well. We definitely do not recommend you put up barbed wire or put up something that's going to bust their ATV tires or something like that. But it's very hard to prevent them from coming on. All you can do is post the signage to let them know, build a fence if you want, but that's an awfully expensive thing to do just to prevent people from hunting. But just know that your liability is intended to protect you, that if they're on your property, even without your permission, and they decided to sue you over it, your liability would respond on your behalf.
Thank you.
We find it all the time as well at our property, the trespassers, snowmobilers, etc. If a claim ever did occur and it was brought in front of a judge and you've had your no trespassing signs up, you've done everything you can, what a reasonable person would do to deter people from being on your property, that stands up and the court looks at that closely. And if you've done nothing and haven't put up no trespassing signs or anything like that, the court will take that against you. But if you've done everything you can with the no trespassing signs, you've done something there to warn everybody that this is private property as well. We find it all the time, and it happens everywhere. Yeah.
Any other questions?
What about so like for people here, like if some people are running, say, purebred breeding stock or something like that, can people put this kind of I guess a general question, but could they insure like individual animals, or would it fall under, like, would they just say, okay, I have 1,000 ewes? Is it just like a blanket kind of thing, or can they say, okay, we have some very expensive breeding stock we want to insure separately?
Yeah, you can insure those animals separately. We run cattle ourselves. We've got a blanket amount on our herd, and then of course every farm's got their princess or the high bloodline, the high percentage, the purebred animals, things like that. I mean, and if you lose that, I mean that's what you're basing your flock around for the coming years, and you can put an amount on that animal that if you lost it, that's what you're going to be paid back. A couple of things we generally need from that, depending on the value of it. They do want to see a bill of sale to prove the value of it. First of all, if you want $5,000 coverage on that yo, and you've got to prove it. That's just the one thing that's got to happen. A lot of the times they want a vet inspection on them to confirm that they're healthy as well. And I know on the cattle end, they want those semen tested and things like that to make sure that they're a producer as well. But you put them on a schedule basis, is what it's called, Phil. And if you lose the animal and subject to your deductible, you're paid back the amount as long as it's covered loss. You bet.
Perfect. Thanks.
I have a question.
Can I just add one other note on that before we go on? There would be semen and embryos that might be needing to be insured as well. And we do have the coverage that can insure those tanks that are holding them, and or even transportation of them if needed, if they're being shipped somewhere. So that's also available.
Can I get a question in here? Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Gary.
Yeah, okay. Back to the snowmobile deal. On my property, the snowmobile club has a route through my property. Now, would they have that insured, or should I have it insured?
Most snowmobile clubs do carry their own liability insurance for the trails that they are responsible for. But Gary, if you own the land, you also have the liability. It would be a good idea to let your insurance carrier know that your land is used as part of the snowmobile trail, but it is very common for farmers to have their land used for that. And depending on the snowmobile club, most snowmobile, especially if they're part of the OFSA, I think it is, they have the liability insurance for the trails and operations on the trail.
Okay, so I better check it out with them.
I would, yes.
Yeah, okay.
And Gary, one thing too is you can ask your local snowmobile club for what's called a certificate of insurance. That way you get proof that they have the liability insurance.
Yeah. Well, it's a pretty major trail that goes through me. And it, I guess I better look after it.
Good idea.
Oh, let's see. Sure.
Any other questions out there, guys?
I'd like to ask a quick question, if possible. I'm not alone, I'm sure, with owning an older barn that was possibly constructed in the late 1800s with large wooden beams and so on and so forth. Now, my barn has been jacked up and retrofitted over the years, and it is all steel and steel roof and so on. If there was a total loss, what is the standard reconstruction process that is involved in trying to recreate a barn that does have large beams that obviously aren't available at Ronar Home Hardware anymore?
The chances are on that they're not going to, I mean, nobody's going to build you the old same timber frame barn anymore. It's just, the construction just isn't there for it anymore. You can get them built, but you're probably going to look at more of a lower profile building going forward, something that's a little bit more user friendly. What they're going to replace it with is whatever the limit that we had on the policy, up to that limit as well. Now, if it is, as you said, it's been retrofitted, it's in impeccable condition and everything, you can request that the insurance company come in and inspect it. And if you want to, if it passed an inspection, even though it's older and everything, but you've done the upkeep on it, a lot of the times the insurance company will put that on a broad form as well and insure it to your full value. So if you lose that barn, the investment you have in that building is replaced as well.
Sometimes on those buildings too, Corey, if you allow the insurance company to do an inspection, they might allow us to insure it on what's called an agreed value, which means you don't necessarily have replacement costs and you don't have actual cash value. It's an agreed value that you and the insurance company agree that that barn is worth. And then should there be a total loss, damage to that building, that's the amount that's going to be paid out minus your deductible. And then therefore you can take that amount and build the building that you are going to utilize now. But like Nathan said, building some of these older style barns just doesn't happen nowadays. We also see a lot more coverall buildings being constructed because they're a solid, good building to utilize. But there is an opportunity sometimes with insurance companies to get a stated amount policy or limit on that barn to make sure that you and the insurance company agree on a value if that were to be completely destroyed.
Thank you.
Could I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
So my barn sits on a hill. It's an older bank barn, and across the road from the barn and my house is a graveyard. And my grandpa, I bought the farm from my grandfather, and so the barn has been there since like the early 1900s. And the graveyard wasn't always there, but it is now. So when we get a heavy rain, there was cattle up on the hill for 100 years. That rain washes down to a culvert and it drains into the graveyard. Would I be at any risk there with the drainage going into the graveyard?
Unfortunately, I would say you are a bit at a risk. Yeah. I mean, you're not going to cause bodily injury to somebody. You know, I'm not trying to be insensitive here, but they're already dead. You can't hurt them anymore, right? But what you have to think about is that family members coming to visit that site might, you know, have an issue with what's going on. I don't even know if it's insurable, to be honest, Joe, but I do believe that you do have an issue where the cemetery committee might say, we need you to do something so that you can prevent this from coming into our property, which of course is an added expense to you, even though the farm was there first. But it's definitely could be something that's there. There's this thing out there called mental anguish. That's something that could be, you know, somebody can make the accusation against. It's very difficult to get insurance for the mental anguish, but mental anguish is when somebody feels that they have suffered because of something they've seen or been present for, but it actually didn't physically hurt them. It's just a mentally, they've seen it and they have a picture in their head and they're caused them suffering. So the situation that you're explaining could be that somebody comes and visits the site and they feel like, you know, the animal waste is coming into their graveyard of their loved one, and therefore they feel like they're hurt, and that could be an issue. So I would love to tell you don't have an issue, but I think you do have a bit of an issue there. And your liability is there to protect you in the event that you cause bodily injury or property damage to a third party. But in this situation, you're really not causing bodily injury. The property damage, I wouldn't even say is really extensive because it's land, but they could still, you know, say they don't feel right that that's happening.
Yeah, okay, definitely something I should maybe look into then.
Joe, putting on my own farmer's hat here, it's been like that for a long time, and that's never changed that way. And a lot of the times, that's a big problem is with the country being constantly. I mean, we're getting new neighbors all the time, and they're not local. They're a lot from the city and things like that. And sometimes they just don't understand that this is the way that the water has always run. And we're dealing with one on our farm. We've got a new neighbor there, and they have a problem with the smell. Well, welcome to the country, folks. This is the way it rolls. I'm really sorry that you don't like the smell, but you shouldn't have bought the place in December. You know what I mean? It's those types of things as well. But what Brian said about the mental anguish and things like that, it all comes part and parcel, and where the runoff goes, again, it could be an issue further down the road. Type of thing. We've actually have a fellow here in our neighborhood who kind of going through kind of a similar instance where a new neighbor has moved in, and the lot that they bought is next to a tile drain field, and the tiles have always pointed the one way, and that was towards his property. The local conservation area is now involved with it and different things as well. So it can be a messy situation that you get into, depending on the neighbor or the next door property that you've got there as well. So it's just one of those things you should probably take a look at things.
Okay, right on. Thank you very much.
Not a problem.
Anyone else, guys? We've got a few more minutes there. If there's any more questions?
I was wondering if the farmer can countersue for mental anguish.
Well, we're not the lawyers, but from what we understand, you can sue anybody you want to sue. So I don't think you'll have an issue with that. But when somebody does come at you with a lawsuit, it's very common that, especially if it's a frivolous, no leg to stand on lawsuit, it's very common that the expenses of that lawsuit are put back on the individuals that came after you. A few of you had mentioned about the fact that, you know, you have hunters or snowmobilers or enthusiasts on your property without your permission. And a lot of times when they come after somebody because of an incident that occurred that you were not negligent in causing, the lawyer is very quick to put the expenses back onto those individuals for doing that accordingly. So the sad ones are, of course, when you know somebody has got severely hurt or severely, maybe death. A lot of times those families don't have any choice but to go after the individuals that own the property or maybe are responsible for the trail. And in those situations, they're already suffering with a severe injury or death. You don't want anything negative to happen to them, but in the meantime, you're like, you weren't supposed to be on my property, so how is this my fault? And thankfully, most times the insurance companies are going to respond, and then, like I said, if anything is there's expenses, it'll be put back onto the individual accordingly.
About the bank barn, is there a schedule of maintenance that you agreed to with the insurance company?
That is a great question. Insurance companies do like to do inspections on properties, but they will also do it if you request it. If you would just call them up and say, hey, listen, I'm kind of curious what you guys would think of this barn. I want to know what the insurance value of it is possible to insure it for. A lot of times they'll come out and they'll provide us with a list of recommendations or things that should be done to the barn. Sometimes they're immediately, but a lot of times there is, a time period to get them done. I had a gentleman north of Sterling area. The electrical system in the barn was very, very poor and needed to be updated. The insurance company was, said we need to see some housekeeping improvements and we need the electrical cleaned up, and gave him 6 months to a year to get that done. And should he not be able to get that done in that time period, they may not have been able to offer him a renewal, but they, gave him tips, tricks. They didn't hire the electrician for him, but if they wanted to know an electrician that they could call, they would recommend certain electricians. So that is possible. When you have an insurance company come do an inspection, though, maybe they're going to find negative things that they want you to do that you weren't prepared for. So there's the plus minuses of having that inspection done. But for sure, if they do the inspection, they can provide you with recommendations to keep maintaining the property.
Anyone else got anything?
Brian, when you were talking about that blanket coverage for equipment on the farm, does that blanket coverage only apply to equipment that you own yourself, or would it apply to any equipment that somebody else was storing on your property?
No, the blanket limit that I was talking about was actually for equipment that you would own. It's difficult to insure stuff you don't own. However, we did mention a couple things. If you're renting a location or renting equipment, you could do that. But the blanket implements is definitely intended for items that you own. I think if you have a manure spreader, but it's an older one and it's worth a couple, $10,000, and then you've got a hay rake and, it's older too, and it's only worth $5,000. And instead of listing them individually, you just want to do a blanket policy for those items or a blanket limit for those items, you can do that. But one thing you did mention there, Jen, was renting out space of your own buildings to others to use. So I'm sure some of you have family members that want to store their boat or maybe their trailer or something like that on your property. That too is something that you should mention to your insurance company that you're doing. We are seeing now more and more that the insurance companies are struggling with insuring or having automobiles in storage. They're trying to change the insurance requirements for what the owner of the property has to carry if they're storing automobiles. But if you're storing a boat or if you're storing an RV trailer or something like that, it is something you should notify your insurance carrier that you're doing, and typically they'll provide the liability coverage for it. The individuals that own those items are still responsible for actually insuring the boat or the trailer themselves.
I had a question about the insuring specific animals. What is the insurance company's requirement to prove that they have the ability to decide the value of the animal?
So that's where a bill of sale comes in, or there's another form called a justification of value. And that could be taken to someone who's they've got to have some credentials, be a livestock judge, be involved in the whatever end of livestock, and they have the ability. That animal's had so many offspring, they've been sold at this value. Different types, brothers and sisters, same bloodline being sold, what their values are as well. We have to prove the value to the insurance company though in order to get it the claim fully paid. That's one of the biggest things. But a bill of sale, if that animal was purchased, or a justification of value form, that's what would be required to be filled out in order to have the proper value on the animal on the individual basis.
If it's just like a run of the mill kind of animal, like not your high end stuff, like they'll just go by sale barn records too, correct?
Yeah, by what they trade at regularly
Yeah.
at the sale barn.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what they would take into account. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Any more questions, guys? Pretty well filled in our time here, I think. Okay, if not, I guess just a big thanks to both our speakers tonight. We really appreciate it. I think there was definitely lots of questions there, so I think we all learned a little bit. So on behalf of everybody, thanks. And if there's any more questions, we'll keep your contacts on there and people can get a hold of you and go from there.
That'd be great.